The courthouse records in Shenandoah County, Virginia, tell of 4 separate deaths between 1837 and 1841, an attorney who fell from his horse on a foggy morning, a banker found drowned in the shallow waters of Cedar Run, a circuit judge who succumbed to sudden illness during harvest season, and a county sheriff discovered at the bottom of his own well. What these records don't reveal is that all 4 men were married to sisters from the same Irish Catholic family, and that each death occurred within 18 months of their respective weddings. The Donovan sisters, Siobhan, Fiona, Eileen, and Maeve, had inherited the largest farm in Shenandoah County, and they would kill to keep it whole. Before we continue with the story of the Donovan family farm and the 4 widows who refused to be separated, let me tell you about the summer of 1836, when everything changed for the Donovan sisters, and a conversation by candlelight sealed the fate of 4 prominent men. The Donovan family farm stretched across 847 acres of Virginia's most fertile soil, bordered by Cedar Run to the north and the Winchester Turnpike to the south. Patrick Donovan, who had arrived from County Cork with nothing but determination and a hatred of English landlords, had spent 37 years building his American dynasty. By 1836, his property was worth more than most small towns, complete with a grand stone house that rivaled any in Richmond, barns that could shelter 200 head of cattle, and grain silos that fed half the county through harsh winters. But Patrick Donovan died that October with a problem that would have destroyed lesser families. The law, Virginia inheritance statutes, dictated that a man's property be divided equally among his children upon death. Patrick had no sons. His 4 daughters, Siobhan, 28, Fiona, 26, Eileen, 24, and Maeve, 21, faced the prospect of watching their father's life work carved into worthless fragments, sold off to satisfy creditors and tax collectors. The sisters had grown up knowing this day would come. Patrick had drilled into them the importance of the land, telling them stories of their grandfather's eviction from Irish soil, of families scattered to the winds when property changed hands. Land is not just dirt and stones, he would say, his accent still thick after decades in America. Land is your blood, your future, your very soul. Lose the land and you lose everything that makes you who you are. Shenandoah County in 1836 was a place where such sentiments carried weight. The German and Irish farmers who had settled there understood the sacred nature of property ownership in a way that newer Americans, those whose families had always owned land, never could. But understanding the importance of keeping land and actually managing to do so were 2 very different challenges. The Donovan sisters were not ordinary farm women. Siobhan, with the eldest, possessed a sharp intelligence that she had learned to hide behind demure smiles and downcast eyes. She could calculate compound interest faster than most bankers, and had been secretly managing the farm's books since her father's eyesight began failing. Fiona had inherited her father's gift for reading people, for sensing their weaknesses and desires with an almost supernatural precision. Eileen possessed an ethereal beauty that made men forget their own names, combined with a ruthless practicality that her angelic face concealed perfectly. Maeve, the youngest, had been blessed with a voice that could charm birds from trees, and a talent for playing whatever role the situation demanded. Together, they formed a conspiracy of survival that would make Shenandoah County history. Though the true nature of their conspiracy would remain hidden for nearly a century, the plan emerged during the long nights following their father's funeral, when the sisters gathered in the kitchen by lamplight to confront their future. The property taxes alone would consume their savings within 2 years. Marriage, the traditional solution for propertyless women, would scatter them to different households, different names, different loyalties. But what if marriage could serve their purposes instead of destroying them? "We stay together," Siobhan declared on a November evening when frost covered the windows and the fire cast dancing shadows on the stone walls. "Whatever it takes, we stay together and we keep the farm whole." "The law says differently," Eileen pointed out, ever practical. "The law," Fiona said slowly, "can be influenced." It was Maeve who spoke the words that would damn them all. "Men die, sisters. Husbands die. and widows inherit everything. The first death occurred on March 15, 1838, just 14 months after Patrick Donovan's funeral and 6 months after Siobhan's marriage to Elias Hawthorne, the most prominent attorney in Shenandoah County. Hawthorne had been a logical choice, a successful Irish Catholic lawyer in his early 40s, a widower with no children, a man wealthy enough to pay the Donovan property taxes without blinking, and influential enough to help restructure the family's legal obligations. Their courtship had been brief but intense. Hawthorne, who had been a bachelor for 3 years since his first wife's death from consumption, found himself completely enchanted by Siobhan's combination of beauty and intelligence. She could discuss legal precedents with the same ease that she planned elaborate dinner parties. She laughed at his stories of courtroom victories and listened intently to his dreams of running for county judge. Within 2 months of their first meeting at Sunday Mass, Elias Hawthorne was convinced that Siobhan Donovan was the answer to his lonely prayers. The wedding took place in December 1837, a grand affair that announced to Shenandoah County society that the Donovan family fortunes were secure. Hawthorne moved into the stone farmhouse, bringing with him not only his considerable wealth, but also his legal expertise in restructuring the property ownership to benefit all 4 sisters. The arrangement was complicated but legal, a family trust that kept the land intact while providing for each sister's future security. But Elias Hawthorne had underestimated his new wife's true priorities. Within weeks of the wedding, he began to notice disturbing patterns. Siobhan seemed more interested in her sister's welfare than in their marriage. She insisted that Fiona, Eileen, and Maeve continue living in the main house, turning what should have been a honeymoon period into an extended family gathering. When Hawthorne suggested that newlyweds might benefit from privacy, Siobhan's response was swift and cold. "My sisters are my blood, Elias. They stay." The tension escalated when Hawthorne discovered that Siobhan had been using his legal connections to investigate the financial situations of several prominent Shenandoah County bachelors. When confronted, she claimed she was merely looking out for her sisters' futures. But Hawthorne sensed something more calculating in her behavior. The morning of March 15th began with an argument. Elias Hawthorne had received an offer to purchase a law practice in Richmond, an opportunity that would advance his career considerably, but would require leaving Shenandoah County. When he presented the idea to Siobhan over breakfast, her reaction was immediate and vehement. "We're not leaving," she stated flatly, not looking up from her porridge. "This is our future, Siobhan. A chance to build something bigger than a country law practice. Our future is here, this land, this farm, my sisters. Your sisters can visit us in Richmond. They can even come live with us once they're married." Siobhan finally looked at him, and Hawthorne later told his law clerk that her expression had frightened him. "You don't understand, do you, Elias? We don't leave. We don't separate. Ever." The argument continued as Hawthorne prepared to ride to his office in Winchester town. The morning was thick with fog, unusual for March, but not unprecedented in Virginia's unpredictable spring weather. Neighbors later reported hearing raised voices from the Donovan house, though the fog muffled the specific words. At approximately 9:30 that morning, Elias Hawthorne's horse returned to the farmhouse without his rider. The animal was sweating heavily, its eyes wide with what appeared to be terror. Siobhan immediately organized a search party, her distress appearing genuine and overwhelming. They found Hawthorne's body 3 hours later, sprawled beside the main road approximately half a mile from the farm, his neck broken from what appeared to be a catastrophic fall from his horse. The county coroner, Dr. James Mallory, conducted a thorough examination. The injuries were consistent with a fall from horseback: a broken neck, contusions on the skull, and bruising that suggested the horse had stepped on Hawthorne's chest after throwing him. The fog would have made the familiar road treacherous, and Hawthorne's mare was known to be skittish around sudden sounds or movements. But several details troubled those who knew the couple well. Hawthorne was an experienced horseman who had ridden that same route hundreds of times in all weather conditions. More puzzling was the horse's condition when it returned. The animal showed signs of extreme agitation that seemed excessive for a simple fall. Most disturbing of all was the fact that despite Hawthorne's frequent freakouts, both him and his wife were good to each other, preferring talking things out. Siobhan's reaction. While her grief appeared genuine, her immediate concern seemed to focus on practical matters, securing Hawthorne's will, consolidating his assets, and ensuring that his legal arrangements for the farm remained intact. The funeral drew hundreds of mourners. Elias Hawthorne had been well respected in Shenandoah County legal circles, and his sudden death shocked the community. Siobhan played the role of grieving widow perfectly, accepting condolences with appropriate tears and dignity. But those closest to the family noticed that her sisters seemed less like mourners and more like supporters of a woman who had successfully completed a difficult task. Within a month of the funeral, Fiona Donovan began accepting social invitations from Rupert Langley, the most successful banker in Shenandoah County. The Langley courtship followed a pattern that would become disturbingly familiar to anyone paying close attention to the Donovan sisters' romantic lives. Rupert Langley was a practical man in his late 30s, a Scottish Presbyterian who had converted to Catholicism to marry his first wife, deceased 3 years earlier from childbed fever. His bank held mortgages on half the farms in Shenandoah County, and his personal wealth rivaled that of Richmond's merchant princes. Fiona approached Langley with a combination of vulnerability and strength that proved irresistible to a man who had spent 3 lonely years burying himself in ledger books and loan documents. She would appear at his bank on Tuesday afternoons, ostensibly to discuss the family's financial arrangements following Elias Hawthorne's death, but their conversations gradually shifted from business to personal matters. "I worry about my sisters," Fiona confided during one of these meetings, her voice carrying just the right note of concern. "Siobhan is still mourning, of course, but Eileen and Maeve, they need guidance, protection. A woman alone in this world faces so many dangers." Langley, who had no siblings and had often wondered what family loyalty might feel like, found himself drawn to Fiona's devotion to her sisters. Here was a woman who understood that blood ties transcended all other considerations, a rare quality in his experience. Their engagement, announced in August 1838, surprised no one who had observed Langley's transformation from grieving widower to besotted suitor. The wedding took place in October, exactly 1 year after Patrick Donovan's death and 7 months after Elias Hawthorne's funeral. Langley moved into the farmhouse, bringing with him not only his considerable wealth, but also his expertise in financial management. Like Hawthorne before him, he restructured the property arrangements to provide additional security for all 4 sisters, never questioning Fiona's insistence that the family remain together. But Rupert Langley was a more methodical man than Elias Hawthorne had been, and his banker's instincts led him to notice patterns that a lawyer might miss. Within weeks of the wedding, he began keeping a private journal, recording observations that would prove prophetic. November 3, 1838. Fiona insists on maintaining separate accounts for each sister's inheritance from father, says it's temporary until they all marry, but Eileen shows no interest in suitors despite obvious beauty. Maeve actively discourages men who call on her, beginning to suspect they have no intention of marrying. November 18, 1838. Siobhan visited bank today to discuss investment opportunities. Her knowledge of compound interest and property values exceeds that of most businessmen. Asked detailed questions about inheritance laws, specifically regarding widows' rights in cases of intestate death, claimed academic curiosity, but conversation felt calculated. December 1, 1838. Overheard conversation between Fiona and Eileen about maintaining unity and protecting the legacy. When they noticed me listening, quickly changed subject to Christmas preparations, growing convinced the sisters have made some kind of pact regarding property. December 15, 1838. Fiona has become distant, mechanical in her affections, shows more interest in discussing business than in normal marital relations. When I mentioned possibility of starting our own family, her reaction was cold, almost hostile. "The 4 of us are family enough," she said. Langley's suspicions deepened when he discovered that Eileen had begun receiving regular visits from Judge Harlan Beaumont, the circuit judge who presided over Shenandoah County's most important legal cases. Beaumont was a distinguished man in his 50s, a widower with grown children who lived in Richmond. He was also the judge who would oversee any legal challenges to the Donovan family's property arrangements. The banker's training had taught him to recognize patterns, and the pattern emerging around the Donovan sisters troubled him deeply. But Rupert Langley had made a crucial error in his analysis.
He assumed that recognizing a conspiracy would be enough to protect him from becoming its next victim. The second death occurred on February 8, 1839. During one of the coldest winters in Shenandoah County memory, Langley had taken to walking the property boundaries each morning, partly for exercise and partly to inspect the farm's winter preparations. The Cedar Run, which formed the northern border of the Donovan property, had frozen solid for the first time in decades, creating what appeared to be safe passage across the water. Langley's body was discovered by a neighbor searching for stray cattle. The banker had apparently attempted to cross the run on the ice, which had given way under his weight, plunging him into the frigid water below. The current had carried him nearly a quarter-mile downstream before his body became wedged against a fallen log. Death by drowning, complicated by exposure to the extreme cold. Exactly what one would expect from such an accident. But Langley had left behind his journal, hidden in his personal safe at the bank. The final entry, dated February 7th, revealed the depth of his suspicions. Fiona knows I suspect something. Her behavior has become increasingly erratic. She insists on accompanying me everywhere, claims she's worried about my safety, but her concern feels more like surveillance. Have decided to confront her tomorrow about my suspicions regarding Elias Hawthorne's death. If something happens to me, look to the sisters. They are not what they seem. Dr. Mallory, who had examined Elias Hawthorne's body the year previous, found Langley's death equally straightforward from a medical perspective. Drowning in icy water was a common winter hazard in rural Virginia. The ice on Cedar Run, while appearing solid, had been weakened by an underground spring that created unpredictable thin spots. Langley's body showed no signs of violence, no defensive wounds, no indication that his death was anything other than a tragic accident. Fiona's grief seemed as genuine as Siobhan's had been, but observers noted that both widows appeared more concerned with practical matters than with emotional devastation. Within days of Langley's funeral, they were meeting with lawyers and bank officials, ensuring that the family's financial security remained intact. The pattern was becoming clear to anyone willing to see it. But in a community that respected the sanctity of marriage and the tragedy of young widowhood, few were prepared to voice their suspicions aloud. Eileen's engagement to Judge Harlan Beaumont was announced 6 weeks after Rupert Langley's funeral. Judge Harlan Beaumont represented the pinnacle of Shenandoah County society, a man whose legal decisions affected thousands of lives and whose social position opened doors throughout Virginia. At 53, he commanded respect in courtrooms from Richmond to Lynchburg, and his appointment to the circuit court had been seen as a stepping stone to higher judicial positions, possibly even the state Supreme Court. Eileen's pursuit of the judge demonstrated a sophistication that surpassed even her sister's previous campaigns. Rather than the direct approach Fiona had used with Langley, or the intellectual partnership Siobhan had cultivated with Hawthorne, Eileen employed what could only be described as a campaign of strategic vulnerability. She first appeared in Beaumont's courtroom in March 1839, ostensibly seeking advice about property law related to her father's estate. Her beauty was undeniable, but what captured Beaumont's attention was her apparent innocence regarding legal matters, combined with an intelligence that made her questions unexpectedly perceptive. She seemed like a sheltered flower, who nonetheless possessed a keen understanding of the world around her. "I'm afraid I don't understand these inheritance complications, Your Honor," she said, during their first private conversation, her blue eyes wide with apparent confusion. "My sisters and I simply want to honor our father's wishes, but the law seems to design to destroy families rather than protect them." Beaumont, who had spent decades dealing with grasping relatives and contested wills, found Eileen's family loyalty refreshing. Here was a young woman who put blood ties above personal ambition, who sought legal guidance not for personal gain, but to protect her sister's welfare. Their conversations gradually expanded beyond legal matters to encompass literature, philosophy, and politics.
The judge's own experiences with loss. His wife had died 5 years earlier, and his children had scattered to distant cities, leaving him increasingly isolated. Eileen's strategy was patience itself. She never pushed for personal meetings, never suggested romantic interest, never appeared to be anything other than a grateful young woman seeking a respected elder's guidance. But somehow, Beaumont found himself looking forward to her visits, planning his schedule around their conversations, and gradually opening his heart to someone who seemed to understand his loneliness without taking advantage of it. The engagement announcement in May 1839 shocked Shenandoah County society more than the previous marriages had. Judge Beaumont was a pillar of respectability, a man whose judgment was considered unimpeachable. That he would marry the third Donovan sister following the convenient deaths of her sister's husbands struck many observers as either remarkably coincidental or remarkably suspicious. But Beaumont himself seemed genuinely happy for the first time in years. Eileen brought light into his austere life, filling his house with laughter and warmth. She showed genuine interest in his work, intelligent curiosity about legal precedents, and a remarkable ability to remember details about cases and colleagues. More importantly, she shared his growing concern about the suspicious pattern of deaths surrounding her family. "I worry about my sisters," Eileen confided to Beaumont 2 weeks before their wedding. "Siobhan and Fiona have been different since their husbands died, more secretive, more intense about keeping the family together. Sometimes I feel like they're planning something, but I can't imagine what." This conversation would later be remembered as either Eileen's attempt to distance herself from her sister's conspiracy or as the most calculating manipulation of all, using Beaumont's own suspicions to absolve herself of guilt while positioning herself as an unwitting victim of her sister's schemes. The wedding took place in July 1839, a smaller affair than the previous ceremonies, partly out of respect for the recent deaths, and partly due to growing whispers about the Donovan family's unusual luck in love and loss. Beaumont moved into the farmhouse like his predecessors, though he insisted on maintaining his own residence in town for professional purposes. This arrangement meant he spent weekdays at the farm and returned to Winchester for court sessions. The judge's legal training made him a more careful observer than either Hawthorne or Langley have been. Within a month of his marriage, he began documenting disturbing patterns of behavior that his predecessors had either missed or dismissed. His private notes, discovered years later, revealed a man growing increasingly convinced that he had married into a conspiracy. August 10, 1839. Eileen insists on knowing my schedule in advance, claims she wants to plan meals and social events accordingly, but her questions seem more focused on when I'll be traveling alone than on domestic arrangements. August 25, 1839. Overheard Siobhan and Fiona discussing the final arrangement and completing the plan. When I entered room, they immediately changed subject. Eileen's reaction was odd. She seemed frightened rather than curious. September 2, 1839, found Eileen examining my will and insurance documents. She claimed she was trying to understand legal terminology, but her questions were surprisingly sophisticated, beginning to suspect she knows more about law than she pretends. September 15, 1839, direct confrontation with Eileen about my suspicions regarding her sisters. Her response was immediate tears and protests of innocence. But something about her reaction felt rehearsed. Either she's a victim of her sister's schemes or a better actress than I imagined. Judge Beaumont's position gave him access to information that his predecessors had lacked. He quietly began investigating the deaths of Elias Hawthorne and Rupert Langley, requesting copies of coroner reports and interviewing witnesses. What he discovered disturbed him deeply. Both men had died at times they were known to be in conflict with their wives about leaving Shenandoah County. Both deaths had occurred under circumstances that, while appearing accidental, showed evidence of careful timing and opportunity. Most troubling of all, both men had made recent changes to their wills that heavily favored their wives and, by extension, the entire Donovan family. But Beaumont's investigation revealed something else. He was not the only person asking questions about the Donovan sisters. A private investigator named Daniel Murphy had been making quiet inquiries around Shenandoah County, claiming to represent interested parties who were concerned about the pattern of deaths. Murphy's questions focused on the sisters' financial arrangements, their relationships with local business leaders, and their future marriage plans. When Beaumont attempted to contact Murphy directly, he discovered that the investigator had already left Shenandoah County, but not before interviewing several key witnesses and requesting copies of public records related to the Donovan property. Someone outside the family was beginning to piece together the truth about the sisters' conspiracy. On October 30th, 1839, Judge Beaumont made the decision that would save or damn him. He confronted Eileen directly about his discoveries and demanded to know the truth about her sisters' involvement in their husbands' deaths. Eileen's response would determine whether the fourth Donovan sister was a co-conspirator or simply another victim of her family's ruthless determination to stay together. The confrontation between Judge Beaumont and Eileen took place in the farmhouse parlor on a rain-soaked evening when Fiona and Maeve had traveled to Winchester town for supplies, leaving the newlyweds alone for the first time in weeks. Beaumont had planned the timing carefully, understanding that his wife's behavior changed dramatically when her sisters were present versus when they were apart. "Eileen," he began, his voice carrying the authority of decades on the bench. "I know what your sisters have done. The question now is whether you're their accomplice or their next victim." Eileen's reaction was immediate and visceral. She collapsed into a chair, her face draining of color, her hands trembling as she pressed them to her mouth. For several minutes, she said nothing, staring at her husband with an expression that combined terror, relief, and something that might have been gratitude. "I've been waiting for someone to figure it out. I've been praying that someone would stop them before they make me do what they did." What followed was a confession that revealed the true scope of the Donovan sisters' conspiracy. According to Eileen, the plan had been Siobhan's creation. Conceived during those candlelit conversations following her father's funeral, the eldest sister had calculated that 4 strategic marriages, followed by 4 convenient deaths, would not only keep the family property intact, but would also create a financial empire that could support them in luxury for the rest of their lives. She said, "We had to think like men," Eileen revealed, her voice growing stronger as she spoke. She said, "Men use violence in politics to get what they want, but women have to be smarter, more patient." She said, "If we did it right, no one would ever suspect us, because people see what they expect to see, grieving widows, not calculating killers." The confession revealed the disturbing efficiency of the sisters' methods. Each death had been meticulously planned months in advance, with contingencies for different scenarios and careful attention to creating plausible accidents. Siobhan had studied Elias Hawthorne's daily routines for weeks before his death, noting his route to town, his horse's temperament, and the weather patterns that might provide cover for their actions. She drugged his coffee that morning, Eileen revealed, something that would make him dizzy, disoriented, but would be gone from his system by the time anyone examined his body. Then she spooked his horse deliberately, threw a stone at the exact moment he was riding past the steepest part of the road. Rupert Langley's death had required more elaborate preparation. Fiona had spent weeks studying the ice patterns on Cedar Run, identifying the exact location where underground springs created unpredictable weak spots. On the morning of his death, she had used heated iron rods to weaken the ice further, creating a trap that would appear completely natural. She walked with him that morning, Eileen continued, tears now flowing freely. She insisted on accompanying him to check the property boundaries, something she'd never done before. She guided him to exactly the right spot on the ice, then stepped aside just as it gave way. She said later that she had to hold his head under the water for nearly a minute, but the cold made him weak, so he couldn't fight her effectively. But Eileen's most shocking revelation concerned her own role in the conspiracy. She had not been an unwitting victim of her sister's schemes. She had been their reluctant accomplice from the beginning. Siobhan and Fiona had made it clear that her cooperation was not optional, that the family's survival depended on all 4 sisters playing their assigned roles. "They told me that if I refused, they would make it appear killer all along," she explained. Siobhan said it would be easy to plant evidence suggesting that I had murdered Elias and Rupert out of jealousy or greed. They said no one would believe that 3 sisters could work together so efficiently, but everyone would believe that one sister had gone mad with jealousy. Judge Beaumont listened to this confession with growing horror, not only at the crimes being described, but at the realization that his own death had been planned with the same methodical precision. Eileen revealed that his murder was scheduled for November 15, 1839, less than 3 weeks away. The method would be poisoning, using a slow-acting toxin that would mimic the symptoms of a heart attack, a plausible cause of death for a man of his age and professional stress level. Maeve has been practicing with different doses, Eileen revealed. She's been testing them on stray cats and dogs, finding the right amount that would kill quickly enough to prevent recovery, but slowly enough to seem natural. Shaban said, "Your death had to be perfect because you're too prominent for people to accept another convenient accident." But Beaumont's investigation had uncovered another disturbing element of the conspiracy: the involvement of Daniel Murphy, the private investigator who had been asking questions around Shenandoah County. According to Eileen, Murphy was not working for interested parties, as he had claimed. He was working for the Donovan sisters themselves, hired to identify anyone who might be getting too close to the truth about their crimes. Shaban wanted to know if anyone suspected us, Eileen explained. She said we needed to stay ahead of any investigations, to know what people were saying and thinking. Murphy reports back to her every week with the names of anyone who's asking questions about our family. This revelation meant that Beaumont's own investigation was known to the sisters, that his suspicions had been reported back to them, and that his confrontation with Eileen might itself be part of their larger plan. Perhaps Eileen's confession was genuine, or perhaps it was an elaborate manipulation designed to make him lower his guard at the crucial moment. "How do I know you're telling the truth now?" Beaumont demanded. "How do I know this isn't just another layer of deception?" Eileen's response would determine not only Beaumont's fate, but also whether the Donovan sisters' conspiracy would finally be exposed, or would claim its fourth and final victim. She walked to the parlor desk, opened a locked drawer with a key she wore around her neck, and withdrew a leather-bound journal filled with handwritten pages. "This contains everything," she said, placing the journal in Beaumont's hands. "Every detail of every murder, every plan, every conversation. I've been documenting it all since Elias's death, thinking that someday I might need proof of what really happened." As Beaumont began reading, the sound of approaching horses announced the return of Fiona and Maeve from their trip to town. Eileen's eyes met her husband's with an expression of desperate urgency. "They can't know that I've told you," she whispered. "If they suspect that you know the truth, they'll kill you tonight." The journal that Eileen placed in Judge Beaumont's hands contained 3 years of meticulous documentation that transformed the Donovan sisters from suspected criminals into confirmed monsters. Written in Eileen's careful script, the pages detailed not only the murders of Elias Hawthorne and Rupert Langley, but also the systematic planning that had preceded each death and the cold calculation that had followed. The first entry, dated November 15, 1836, exactly 1 month after Patrick Donovan's funeral, revealed the moment when grief transformed into something far more dangerous. Shaban has presented us with a choice that isn't really a choice at all. We can watch Father's legacy be destroyed by inheritance laws, scattered to creditors and tax collectors until nothing remains of 37 years of work, or we can take control of our own destiny. She says that women throughout history have used marriage as a weapon, but we'll be the first to use widowhood as a strategy. 4 marriages, 4 deaths, 4 fortunes. By the time we're finished, we'll own half of Shenandoah County. Subsequent entries documented the sisters' transformation from grieving daughters into calculating predators. They studied potential targets like military strategists, evaluating each man's wealth, social position, personal habits, and vulnerabilities. Elias Hawthorne had been selected not only for his legal expertise, but also for his loneliness. A widower desperate for companionship would be more likely to make hasty, emotional decisions about marriage and inheritance. December 3, 1836. Shaban says, "We must never allow ourselves to feel guilty about what we're planning. These men will die happy, believing themselves loved and cherished. Their deaths will be quick and relatively painless. far more merciful than the slow starvation that awaits us if we lose the farm. She says we're not murderers, we're survivors, using the only weapons available to women in a world designed to destroy us. But the journal also revealed the psychological toll of their conspiracy. Eileen's entries grew increasingly disturbed as the plan progressed from theoretical discussion to actual implementation. March 16, 1838. Elias is dead, and Siobhan shows no more emotion than if she had slaughtered a chicken for dinner. She told me that the hardest part was pretending to grieve at the funeral, not because she felt guilt, but because she was actually proud of how perfectly the murder had been executed. I think my sister may be genuinely mad, but I'm too frightened of her to resist. The journal documented how each sister's personality had been weaponized for their conspiracy. Siobhan served as the mastermind, using her intelligence to plan each murder and her ruthlessness to ensure that no detail was overlooked. Fiona functioned as the emotional manipulator, able to read men's weaknesses and exploit them with surgical precision. Maeve had become their information gatherer and, when necessary, their executioner, her youthful appearance and sweet voice making her the perfect person to administer poison without arousing suspicion. July 20th, 1839. Harlan grows more suspicious each day, asking questions about Elias and Rupert that I cannot answer without revealing the truth. Siobhan says this was always part of the plan, that my marriage to a judge would eventually force us to be more careful, but would also give us protection from legal prosecution. Who would believe that a woman would confess murder to her own husband? She asked. And if he tries to expose us, who would believe that a judge's own wife had fooled him so completely? As Beaumont read these passages, the sound of horses approaching the farmhouse grew louder, accompanied by his wife's voice calling out cheerful greetings to the farmhands. He had perhaps minutes to decide how to respond to Eileen's revelations before Fiona and Maeve returned to the house and the opportunity for private conversation disappeared.
I must appear devastated, but not surprised, since everyone knows about the stress of Harlan's judicial responsibilities. As Fiona and Maeve's voices grew closer to the house, Beaumont made the most important decision of his career. He closed the journal, looked into Eileen's terrified eyes, and whispered the words that would either save them both or ensure their mutual destruction. Tomorrow morning, I'm riding to Richmond to meet with federal investigators. You're coming with me, and you're going to tell them everything you've told me tonight. Eileen's response revealed whether she was truly seeking redemption or was simply playing the final card in her sister's elaborate game. They'll kill us both before we reach the county line. Siobhan has been planning for this possibility since the day we started. She has men watching the roads, people who owe her favors, ways of making deaths look accidental, even when victims are trying to escape. The front door opened with a cheerful creak as Fiona and Maeve entered the house, their voices bright with the false warmth that had become their trademark since the murders began. Eileen quickly concealed the journal beneath her shawl while Beaumont arranged his features into an expression of casual interest in his wife's activities. "Harlan, Eileen," Fiona called out, her footsteps approaching the parlor. "You'll never guess what we discovered in town. Mrs. Henderson at the dry goods store has been spreading the most interesting rumors about our family's extraordinary luck with marriage." Maeve's laughter echoed from the hallway, musical and innocent as always. She suggested that perhaps we Donovan women possess some sort of supernatural charm over men. If only she knew how right she was, though not in the way she imagines. Beaumont felt his blood chill at the casual cruelty in Maeve's voice. These women spoke of murder with the same tone other people might use to discuss the weather or the price of grain. Eileen's hand found his beneath the table, her fingers trembling with what he hoped was genuine fear rather than calculated performance. "What did you tell Mrs. Henderson?" Eileen asked, her voice remarkably steady despite the terror in her eyes. Fiona appeared in the parlor doorway, her smile radiant and predatory. "I told her that the Donovan women have always understood the importance of taking care of the men we love. We make sure they never want for anything, never have reason to be unhappy, and never have to worry about growing old and burdensome." The implication was clear enough to make Beaumont's hands clench involuntarily. These women viewed murder not as a crime, but as a form of mercy, a way of preserving their victims' happiness by ensuring they died while still beloved and prosperous. It was a rationalization so twisted that it revealed the true depth of their madness. Maeve entered the parlor carrying a tea service, her movements graceful and domestic. I thought we might enjoy some refreshment while we discussed the wonderful news Fiona and I heard in town. Judge Beaumont, you'll be particularly interested in this information given your professional responsibilities. The emphasis on his title carried an undertone of mockery that suggested the sisters knew exactly how much he had discovered about their activities. Beaumont realized that Daniel Murphy, their private investigator, had probably reported his every question, every inquiry, every moment of suspicion back to Siobhan and her co-conspirators. What news would that be? Beaumont asked, accepting a cup of tea while trying to calculate whether the liquid might already contain the foxglove extract that would kill him. Fiona settled into her favorite chair, the same chair where she had planned Rupert Langley's murder 6 months earlier. It seems that certain federal authorities have been making inquiries about unusual death rates among wealthy men in rural Virginia counties. They're particularly interested in cases where young widows inherit substantial fortunes under suspicious circumstances. The words hit Beaumont like a physical blow. If federal investigators were already looking into the pattern of deaths, his own investigation might be redundant, but it also meant that the sisters knew they were under scrutiny from sources beyond local gossip and county officials. Maeve continued the revelation with her characteristic sweet smile. Mrs. Henderson mentioned that a gentleman from Richmond has been asking questions about our family specifically. He wanted to know about the circumstances of Elias's and Rupert's deaths, about our financial arrangements, and about your own marriage to Eileen. Did Mrs. Henderson provide this gentleman with information? Beaumont asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. Oh yes, Fiona replied cheerfully. She told him everything she knew, which unfortunately includes quite a bit of speculation and rumor, along with the actual facts. But you know how these federal investigators are, Harlan. They have ways of separating truth from gossip, especially when they find patterns that suggest organized criminal activity. Eileen's grip on Beaumont's hand tightened to the point of pain. The sisters were telling them that their time had come up, that federal authorities were closing in on their conspiracy, and that the planned timeline for Beaumont's murder had been moved up dramatically. Siobhan's voice echoed from the kitchen, calling for her sisters to join her for a private conversation. Fiona and Maeve excused themselves with apologetic smiles, leaving the married couple alone in the parlor with the understanding that their privacy was temporary and probably illusory. "They're going to kill you tonight," Eileen whispered the moment her sisters left the room. "The federal investigation has forced their hand. They can't wait until November 15th if investigators are already asking questions about suspicious deaths." Beaumont studied her wife's face, searching for any sign of deception. Everything about Eileen's behavior suggested genuine terror, but he had seen how convincingly the Donovan sisters could lie when their survival depended on it. Was this conversation another manipulation designed to make him trust her completely before she administered the poison herself? "How do I know you're not part of this final performance?" he asked quietly. "How do I know that your confession, your fear, and your journal are all part of an elaborate plan to make me lower my guard?" Eileen's response was to reach beneath her shawl and withdraw a small glass vial filled with clear liquid. "This is the foxglove extract that Maeve has been preparing. I was supposed to put 3 drops in your evening brandy tonight, wait for you to collapse, then call for Dr. Mallory to confirm your death from heart failure." She placed the vial in Beaumont's palm, her eyes never leaving his face. "If I were still part of their conspiracy, I would have already administered the poison. The fact that I'm giving it to you instead should prove where my loyalties lie." The sound of intense conversation drifted from the kitchen, too muffled for specific words, but clear enough to indicate that the 3 sisters were engaged in urgent planning. "We leave now," Beaumont decided, "through the back door, take my horse, ride to Winchester town, and straight to the federal authorities. Let your sisters explain to investigators why their co-conspirator and their 4th victim disappeared in the middle of the night." But as they moved toward the back of the house, Maeve's voice called out from the kitchen with artificial sweetness. "Eileen, dear, could you and Harlan join us for a moment? Siobhan has something important she would like to discuss with both of you." It was a summons, not a request, and they both understood that refusing would immediately reveal that their private conversation had uncovered the conspiracy. Eileen looked at her husband with an expression that combined love, terror, and desperate hope.
"If we walk into that kitchen," she whispered, "we may never walk out alive." Judge Harlan Beaumont had spent 27 years making decisions that affected other people's lives, but none had ever carried the weight of the choice he faced on November 1st, 1839. He could walk into the kitchen where 3 murderesses waited with their final trap, or he could attempt an escape that might save his life but would leave the Donovan sisters free to continue their killing spree in other counties, other states, wherever their
I must appear devastated, but not surprised, since everyone knows about the stress of Harlan's judicial responsibilities. As Fiona and Maeve's voices grew closer to the house, Beaumont made the most important decision of his career. He closed the journal, looked into Eileen's terrified eyes, and whispered the words that would either save them both or ensure their mutual destruction. "Tomorrow morning, I'm riding to Richmond to meet with federal investigators. You're coming with me, and you're going to tell them everything you've told me tonight." Eileen's response revealed whether she was truly seeking redemption or was simply playing the final card in her sister's elaborate game. "They'll kill us both before we reach the county line. Siobhan has been planning for this possibility since the day we started. She has men watching the roads, people who owe her favors, ways of making deaths look accidental, even when victims are trying to escape." The front door opened with a cheerful creak as Fiona and Maeve entered the house, their voices bright with the false warmth that had become their trademark since the murders began. Eileen quickly concealed the journal beneath her shawl while Beaumont arranged his features into an expression of casual interest in his wife's activities. "Harlan, Eileen," Fiona called out, her footsteps approaching the parlor. "You'll never guess what we discovered in town. Mrs. Henderson at the dry goods store has been spreading the most interesting rumors about our family's extraordinary luck with marriage." Maeve's laughter echoed from the hallway, musical and innocent as always. She suggested that perhaps we Donovan women possess some sort of supernatural charm over men. If only she knew how right she was, though not in the way she imagines. Beaumont felt his blood chill at the casual cruelty in Maeve's voice. These women spoke of murder with the same tone other people might use to discuss the weather or the price of grain. Eileen's hand found his beneath the table, her fingers trembling with what he hoped was genuine fear rather than calculated performance. "What did you tell Mrs. Henderson?" Eileen asked, her voice remarkably steady despite the terror in her eyes. Fiona appeared in the parlor doorway, her smile radiant and predatory. "I told her that the Donovan women have always understood the importance of taking care of the men we love. We make sure they never want for anything, never have reason to be unhappy, and never have to worry about growing old and burdensome." The implication was clear enough to make Beaumont's hands clench involuntarily. These women viewed murder not as a crime, but as a form of mercy, a way of preserving their victims' happiness by ensuring they died while still beloved and prosperous. It was a rationalization so twisted that it revealed the true depth of their madness. Maeve entered the parlor carrying a tea service, her movements graceful and domestic. "I thought we might enjoy some refreshment while we discussed the wonderful news Fiona and I heard in town. Judge Beaumont, you'll be particularly interested in this information given your professional responsibilities." The emphasis on his title carried an undertone of mockery that suggested the sisters knew exactly how much he had discovered about their activities. Beaumont realized that Daniel Murphy, their private investigator, had probably reported his every question, every inquiry, every moment of suspicion back to Siobhan and her co-conspirators. "What news would that be?" Beaumont asked, accepting a cup of tea while trying to calculate whether the liquid might already contain the foxglove extract that would kill him. Fiona settled into her favorite chair, the same chair where she had planned Rupert Langley's murder 6 months earlier. "It seems that certain federal authorities have been making inquiries about unusual death rates among wealthy men in rural Virginia counties. They're particularly interested in cases where young widows inherit substantial fortunes under suspicious circumstances." The words hit Beaumont like a physical blow. If federal investigators were already looking into the pattern of deaths, his own investigation might be redundant, but it also meant that the sisters knew they were under scrutiny from sources beyond local gossip and county officials. Maeve continued the revelation with her characteristic sweet smile. "Mrs. Henderson mentioned that a gentleman from Richmond has been asking questions about our family specifically. He wanted to know about the circumstances of Elias's and Rupert's deaths, about our financial arrangements, and about your own marriage to Eileen. Did Mrs. Henderson provide this gentleman with information? Beaumont asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. Oh yes, Fiona replied cheerfully. She told him everything she knew, which unfortunately includes quite a bit of speculation and rumor, along with the actual facts. But you know how these federal investigators are, Harlan. They have ways of separating truth from gossip, especially when they find patterns that suggest organized criminal activity. Eileen's grip on Beaumont's hand tightened to the point of pain. The sisters were telling them that their time had come up, that federal authorities were closing in on their conspiracy, and that the planned timeline for Beaumont's murder had been moved up dramatically. Siobhan's voice echoed from the kitchen, calling for her sisters to join her for a private conversation. Fiona and Maeve excused themselves with apologetic smiles, leaving the married couple alone in the parlor with the understanding that their privacy was temporary and probably illusory. "They're going to kill you tonight," Eileen whispered the moment her sisters left the room. "The federal investigation has forced their hand. They can't wait until November 15th if investigators are already asking questions about suspicious deaths." Beaumont studied her wife's face, searching for any sign of deception. Everything about Eileen's behavior suggested genuine terror, but he had seen how convincingly the Donovan sisters could lie when their survival depended on it. Was this conversation another manipulation designed to make him trust her completely before she administered the poison herself? "How do I know you're not part of this final performance?" he asked quietly. "How do I know that your confession, your fear, and your journal are all part of an elaborate plan to make me lower my guard?" Eileen's response was to reach beneath her shawl and withdraw a small glass vial filled with clear liquid. "This is the foxglove extract that Maeve has been preparing. I was supposed to put 3 drops in your evening brandy tonight, wait for you to collapse, then call for Dr. Mallory to confirm your death from heart failure." She placed the vial in Beaumont's palm, her eyes never leaving his face. "If I were still part of their conspiracy, I would have already administered the poison. The fact that I'm giving it to you instead should prove where my loyalties lie." The sound of intense conversation drifted from the kitchen, too muffled for specific words, but clear enough to indicate that the 3 sisters were engaged in urgent planning. "We leave now," Beaumont decided. "Through the back door, take my horse, ride to Winchester town, and straight to the federal authorities. Let your sisters explain to investigators why their co-conspirator and their 4th victim disappeared in the middle of the night." But as they moved toward the back of the house, Maeve's voice called out from the kitchen with artificial sweetness. "Eileen, dear, could you and Harlan join us for a moment? Siobhan has something important she would like to discuss with both of you." It was a summons, not a request, and they both understood that refusing would immediately reveal that their private conversation had uncovered the conspiracy. Eileen looked at her husband with an expression that combined love, terror, and desperate hope. "If we walk into that kitchen," she whispered, "we may never walk out alive." Judge Harlan Beaumont had spent 27 years making decisions that affected other people's lives, but none had ever carried the weight of the choice he faced on November 1st, 1839. He could walk into the kitchen where 3 murderesses waited with their final trap, or he could attempt an escape that might save his life but would leave the Donovan sisters free to continue their killing spree in other counties, other states, wherever their
ambition might take them. The decision was made for him by the sound of multiple horses approaching the farmhouse at high speed. Through the parlor window, Beaumont could see torches burning in the darkness. Too many riders for a casual visit, and moving with too much purpose for a social call. Someone was coming to the Donovan farm with official business, and that someone had brought enough men to handle resistance. "Federal marshals?" Eileen breathed, recognizing the organized movement of law enforcement even in the darkness. "They're here." From the kitchen came the sound of frantic activity, chairs scraping, cabinet doors slamming, urgent whispered conversations. The Donovan sisters had also seen the approaching riders and were implementing whatever emergency plan they had prepared for this exact situation. Siobhan appeared in the parlor doorway, her usual composed demeanor replaced by cold efficiency. "Harlan, Eileen, we need to discuss our story before those men reach the house. There are certain explanations that will serve all of our interests and certain truths that would benefit no one." Even facing imminent arrest, Siobhan Donovan attempted to control the narrative, to find some way of turning the situation to her advantage.
Beaumont realized that this woman would continue manipulating people and circumstances until the moment they placed a noose around her neck. "I think not," Beaumont replied, standing and placing himself between his wife and her sister. "Eileen and I will tell the authorities exactly what happened here, and you'll have to answer for what you've done." Siobhan's expression shifted from calculated calm to genuine fury, revealing for the first time the monster that had been hidden beneath years of careful performance. "You sanctimonious fool! Do you think your precious law will protect you from us? Do you think federal marshals care about the deaths of a few men when there are fortunes and reputations at stake?" "What do you mean?" Beaumont demanded, though part of him already suspected the answer. Maeve appeared beside her eldest sister, her sweet face twisted into something ugly and vindictive. "Did you really think we operated without protection? Without allies in high places? Did you imagine that 4 women could commit perfect murders for 3 years without someone in authority looking the other way?" The implication was staggering. The Donovan sisters' conspiracy had been protected by corruption that reached far beyond Shenandoah County. Someone with significant power had been shielding them from investigation, probably in exchange for a share of their stolen wealth or for services yet to be rendered. Fiona joined her sisters in the doorway, blocking any escape route toward the kitchen. "Judge Beaumont, you're about to learn that justice isn't blind. It's simply expensive. The men riding toward this house aren't coming to arrest us. They're coming to arrest you." Before Beaumont could respond, the sound of boots on the front porch announced the arrival of their visitors. A heavy fist pounded on the door, followed by a voice that carried absolute authority. "Federal marshals, open this door immediately." Siobhan smoothed her dress and arranged her features into an expression of feminine distress. "Remember, Harlan, you're the one with access to legal documents, with the knowledge to forge inheritance papers, with the connections to arrange convenient accidents. Eileen is the traumatized victim who finally found the courage to expose her husband's crimes." The door opened before anyone could respond, and 6 armed men entered the farmhouse with weapons drawn and badges displayed. Their leader, a grizzled man in his 50s, surveyed the scene with experienced eyes that missed nothing. "I'm Marshal William Davies, United States Federal Court for the Eastern District of Virginia. Judge Harlan Beaumont, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, fraud, and corruption in office." The words struck Beaumont like physical blows. The sisters had somehow managed to frame him for their own crimes, turning his investigation against him and using his position as evidence of his guilt rather than his innocence. Eileen stepped forward, tears streaming down her face in what appeared to be genuine anguish. "Marshal Davies, you don't understand. My husband is innocent. My sisters are the ones who killed Elias Hawthorne and Rupert Langley. I have proof, evidence that will show you the truth." But Siobhan was ready for this development, her voice carrying exactly the right note of sorrowful concern for a mentally unstable relative. "I'm afraid my sister has been under tremendous strain since her marriage. She's been making wild accusations, creating elaborate fantasies about murder conspiracies. Dr. Mallory can verify that Eileen has been showing signs of severe mental disturbance." Marshal Davies studied the 4 people before him with the careful attention of a man who had seen every form of deception imaginable. "Mrs. Beaumont, we've received detailed testimony from a private investigator named Daniel Murphy, who claims to have evidence that you and your sisters systematically murdered your husbands for financial gain." The revelation that Murphy had turned against his employers shifted the entire dynamic of the confrontation. Eileen's face lit up with desperate hope, while her sisters exchanged glances of barely controlled panic. "Murphy was supposed to destroy that evidence. He promised us that everything would be eliminated if we paid him enough." The admission hung in the air like a death sentence, confirming everything that Eileen had revealed in her journal, and everything that Beaumont had suspected about his wife's family. Siobhan shot her youngest sister a look of pure hatred, realizing that Maeve's outburst had doomed them all. "Additionally," Marshal Davies continued, "we have sworn testimony from Judge Beaumont himself, provided through intermediaries over the past few weeks, documenting his discovery of the conspiracy and his attempts to gather evidence against the perpetrators. Beaumont stared at the marshal in confusion. He had never provided testimony to federal authorities, had never contacted intermediaries, had only just discovered the full scope of the conspiracy that very evening. "The journal," Eileen said quietly, producing the leather-bound book from underneath her shawl. "Everything is documented here. Every murder, every plan, every conversation. I've been gathering evidence since Elias Hawthorne's death, waiting for the right moment to bring justice for all the men my sisters killed." Siobhan's final words, as the marshals placed shackles around her wrists, revealed the true depth of her twisted logic. "We saved those men from growing old, from becoming burdens to their families, from watching their fortunes disappear and their bodies fail. We gave them love and happiness right up until the moment they died. We were merciful killers, and history will remember us as women who refused to be victims of a system designed to destroy us." As the Donovan sisters were led away to face trial in Richmond, Judge Beaumont realized that Eileen's courage in exposing the conspiracy had saved not only his life, but potentially dozens of other lives. The sisters had indeed been planning to expand their operations beyond Shenandoah County, creating a network of murderous widows that could have operated for decades. The trial that followed became one of the most sensational criminal cases in Virginia history. Siobhan, Fiona, and Maeve Bonavan were convicted on multiple counts of murder and conspiracy, becoming the first women in the state to be sentenced to death for such crimes. They were hanged together on March 15, 1841, exactly 3 years after Elias Hawthorne's murder.